Sometimes necessity builds bridges where love has not yet arrived. The westerly wind blew through the arid lands of Colorado, carrying with it the red dust that covered everything in those dry days. Thomas McKenna watched the horizon from the wooden porch of his property, a farm that stretched for miles beyond what the eye could see. At 52, his grey hair told tales of harsh winters and merciless summers, but his blue eyes still retained the determination that brought him there 2 decades ago. The farm thrived under his calloused hands, but the big house remained eerily silent. Since Eleanor left 3 years ago, a victim of the fever that ravaged the region, Thomas had raised his 2 children alone. 12-year-old Samuel tried to fill the void by taking on responsibilities beyond his years, while little Mary, only 7, still woke up some nights calling for her mother. That October morning, while checking on cattle near the creek that cut through his property, Thomas spotted a lone figure walking down the dusty road. It was a woman, too thin, carrying a simple bundle and shielding her eyes from the sun with a trembling hand. Their dark dresses, faded by time, rippled in the wind like ghosts of the past. Catherine Walsh had lost everything when creditors took over the small house where she lived with her husband. After James's death, the debts grew like weeds after the rain, and she found herself with no choice but to abandon the only life she had ever known. For 3 weeks, he walked through unknown cities, accepting sporadic jobs in exchange for meals, sleeping where the pity of others allowed. The sun was high when she arrived in the vicinity of the McKenna farm. His strength was rapidly exhausted, and thirst made every step a battle against his own body. It was then that he saw the tall man approaching, mounted on a chestnut horse that treaded gently on the parched earth. Thomas dismounted a few feet away, observing the situation with the wisdom of someone who had learned to read human needs on tired faces. The woman was not young. She must have been well-lived. But there was dignity in her posture, even in the face of evident physical fragility. Without many words, he offered water from his canteen and the shade of a nearby tree. Catherine drank slowly, each sip a small salvation as she felt the farmer's eyes on her. They were not eyes of judgment, but of someone who recognized the suffering of others because he had already known his own. It was there, under the ragged shade of that lonely oak tree, that Thomas McKenna made a decision that would change the fate of all of them. Looking at this woman who life had stripped of everything except the strength to keep walking, he saw not only someone in need of help, but an answer to the silent prayers of her children. The proposal that was born on his lips at that moment did not come from a passionate heart, but from the practical understanding that sometimes 2 solitudes can come together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. Catherine raised her tired eyes to meet his, and in that instant they both understood that they were facing a crossroads that would define the rest of their lives. The silence that followed Thomas's words was filled only by the whisper of the wind through the dry leaves. Catherine held her breath, processing the proposal she had just heard, a marriage of convenience, born of mutual need, where she would find a home, and he a mother for his children. The McKenna farm stretched out before her eyes like a promise of stability she hadn't known in months. The main house, built of sturdy wood, had 2 floors and wide windows that seemed to embrace the daylight. A sturdy barn rose a few feet away, surrounded by corrals where cattle grazed peacefully. Everything there breathed order and care, the result of years of dedicated work. Thomas led her into the house with measured steps, allowing her to observe every detail of what could become her new world. The kitchen was large and functional, with a large wooden table in the center and shelves filled with provisions. The walls were decorated with simple but well-kept utensils, evidence of an organized life even in the absence of women. It was when Samuel and Mary showed up at the kitchen door that Catherine felt the real weight of the decision that was being offered. The boy's eyes were too serious for his age, while the little girl hid partially behind her older brother. Both watched the stranger with curiosity, mixed with the natural caution of children who learned that adults could leave without warning. Samuel greeted politely, But Catherine noticed the tension in his young shoulders. He had taken on adult responsibilities too soon and was unwilling to give them up easily. Mary, on the other hand, fixed on her a look full of timid hope, as if she recognized in Catherine something she had lost long ago. Thomas prepared a simple meal while she washed in a basin of fresh water. The harsh soap removed layers of dust from the road, but it could not erase the uncertainty that weighed on his thoughts. For the first time in weeks, she ate until she felt satisfied, each bite a small celebration of the abundance that this house offered. During dinner, Thomas explained the routines of the farm with the practicality of someone who did not have time for rodeos. Mornings started before sunrise, tending to cattle and checking fences. Samuel helped with the lighter tasks, while Mary was responsible for feeding the chickens and collecting the eggs. The education of the children took place in the afternoons, when Thomas or some more learned neighbor came to teach the first letters. Catherine listened attentively, realizing that she was not being invited just to a ceremony, but to take a vital role in the machinery that kept that family running. The prospect did not scare her. On the contrary, after months of wandering aimlessly, the idea of having concrete responsibilities brought unexpected relief. When night fell on the farm, Thomas showed her the room that would be hers if she accepted the proposal. It was simple but comfortable, with a solid bed, a light wood chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the fields where the cattle rested under the starlight. There, alone for the first time since her arrival, Catherine allowed herself to cry. They were not tears of sadness, but of recognition that he had found not only shelter, but the possibility of rebuilding a life with meaning. Outside, she heard the nightly sounds of the farm, the occasional mooing of cattle, the creaking of the wood of the house settling into the cold, the distant echo of Thomas's footsteps checking on the animals one last time before going to sleep. In the morning, when the sun was still just a promise on the horizon, Catherine went downstairs to the kitchen and found Thomas brewing coffee. Their eyes met for a moment, and she nodded softly. They didn't need elaborate words or romantic promises. They both understood the terms of that union: mutual respect, shared care for the children, and the hope that, in time, something deeper might blossom between them. The ceremony took place at the Cedar Creek Wooden Church, a simple building that served the community spread for miles around. Reverend Morrison, a grey-bearded man who had known Thomas since his arrival in the region, conducted the union with proper solemnity, but also with the practical understanding of one who had witnessed many marriages born of necessity. Catherine wore a dark blue dress that had been Eleanor's, hastily fitted by Martha Henderson, the blacksmith's wife, and one of the few women in town with a knack for fine sewing. The fabric, carefully stored for 3 years, still carried the subtle scent of lavender that Eleanor used to wear. For Catherine, wearing that outfit was like taking not only a woman's place in the family, but also the responsibility of honoring her memory. Samuel and Mary remained by their father's side throughout the ceremony, dressed in their best clothes. The boy kept a serious expression, as if he was sealing an important trade deal, while Mary held her brother's hand tightly, her eyes alternating between Catherine and her father, still trying to fully comprehend the changes that were happening in their lives. After the Reverend's final words, the small congregation present offered respectful greetings to the new couple. There was no elaborate celebration or feast, just the quiet acknowledgement that two people had chosen to unite their destinies for the right reasons, even if those reasons didn't include the romantic love that fairy tales promised. The return to the farm marked the beginning of the true adaptation. Catherine took over the household chores with an efficiency that impressed even Thomas. She reorganized the pantry, repaired clothes that had long needed feminine care, and transformed the kitchen into a more welcoming space without altering its essential functionality. More challenging was gaining the trust of the children. Samuel constantly tested the limits of Catherine's authority, not out of malice, but because he had learned to question changes in his life. He had taken on the role of his sister's protector since his mother's death and was not willing to share this responsibility easily. Mary, on the other hand, watched Catherine with a quiet thirst for heartbreaking maternal affection. The girl approached shyly, offering small drawings or wildflowers that she picked during her games, testing whether this new female presence in her life would remain or disappear as her mother had done. It was during an autumn storm that the first true proof of unity arrived. The wind howled through the cracks in the house, and the rain beat against the windows hard enough to wake the whole family. Mary appeared in Catherine's room in the middle of the night, shivering not only from the cold, but from the fear that the storms had always aroused in her since the night her mother had died during a similar storm. Catherine didn't hesitate. He wrapped the girl in his arms and led her to the bed, murmuring words of comfort as he stroked her hair. It was Thomas who found them like this in the morning, when he came to check that they were all well after the storm. The man paused on the doorstep, observing the scene he had not seen in 3 years, his daughter sleeping peacefully in the arms of a woman. At that moment, something changed in the dynamics of the house. Samuel, who had observed the kindness with which Catherine had cared for Mary during the night, began to lower his defenses. Small gestures of acceptance began to appear. He began to pull out the chair for her to sit on during meals, helped carry buckets of water without her asking, and occasionally shared stories about life on the farm that only someone considered family had the right to hear. Thomas watched these changes with a quiet gratitude that grew by the day. Catherine not only fulfilled her practical duties, but brought to the house something he didn't know how to name, a sense of completeness that went beyond mere functionality. She hummed quietly as she prepared meals, arranged wildflowers in makeshift jars, and created small family rituals that made each day less of a struggle for survival and more of a celebration of shared life. The evenings became moments of quiet conversation between Thomas and Catherine. Sitting on the porch after the children had gone to sleep, they shared observations about the day, plans for farm improvements, and gradually fragments of their personal stories. They were not passionate conversations, but respectful exchanges between two people who were learning to build a life together on the solid foundations of mutual trust. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it biting winds and a snow that covered the farm with a white blanket that seemed eternal. It was during these months of enforced isolation that people's true personalities revealed themselves, when there was no escaping the constant proximity and long nights by the fireplace fire. Catherine discovered that Thomas had a habit of carving small wooden figures during winter nights. His rough hands, accustomed to heavy work, moved with surprising delicacy over the wood, creating horses, birds, and little people he never showed to anyone. It was by chance that she found a box full of these creations, stored in a closet, each piece a window into a sensibility that Thomas kept carefully hidden from the world. During a particularly fierce wind, when snow piled up against the windows, creating a white barrier that blocked almost all daylight, Samuel fell ill with a high fever. Catherine spent 3 days and 3 nights at the boy's bedside, applying cold compresses and forcing him to drink small sips of herbal tea that she prepared with dried plants found in the pantry. Thomas watched her care with growing admiration. Catherine did not sleep, barely ate, devoting all her energy to lowering the fever that threatened to consume the boy. It was during these moments of crisis that people showed their true nature, and Catherine revealed a maternal strength that had nothing to do with obligation or duty, but with a genuine love that had quietly grown during the months of living together. When the fever finally subsided and Samuel opened his eyes for the first time in days, it was Catherine's name that he murmured first. No longer seeing her as a stranger who had settled in his house, but as someone who had fought for her life when death was dangerously close. At that moment, the last barriers between them completely disappeared. Mary, frightened by her brother's illness, had grown even closer to Catherine during those difficult days. She helped by bringing clean cloths, kept the fire burning in the fireplace, and finally slept, huddled at the foot of Samuel's bed, like a little guardian determined not to let anything bad happen to her family. It was during one of these nights, when Thomas found Catherine asleep in the chair next to Samuel's bed, with Mary nestled in his lap, that he realized that something fundamental had changed in his life. It was no longer just gratitude or practical convenience. It was something deeper, more permanent, which had grown imperceptibly during the months of shared life. After Samuel's recovery, the family established new rituals. The evenings became times of gathering around the fireplace, where Catherine told stories of her previous life. Thomas shared legends he had heard from other farmers, and the children contributed imaginary adventures they invented during their playtime. There were also comfortable silences, when each one occupied himself with his personal activities, but remained in the same room, united by the presence of each other. Catherine sewed or mended clothes. Thomas carved his little wooden figures. Samuel read the few books they owned, and Mary drew with charcoal on pieces of paper that Thomas could get in the city. One night, when the snow began to recede and the first signs of spring were creeping into the air, Thomas did something that surprised everyone. He presented Catherine with a small carved figure he had made during the long winter nights. It was a woman holding a child, crafted with such care and detail that it seemed almost real. Catherine held the piece with trembling hands, realizing that it was more than a gift. It was a quiet statement that Thomas saw her not just as a practical solution to his family needs, but as someone worthy of his time, his care, and his most intimate art. Samuel and Mary watched the exchange with bright eyes, recognizing the significance of the moment, even without fully understanding all its nuances. To them, that small sculpture represented the ultimate solidification of Catherine as an integral part of their lives, no longer a temporary addition, but a permanent member of the McKenna family. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Thomas and Catherine remained awake longer than usual, sitting before the fireplace, with the fire crackling gently and casting dancing shadows across the walls. They shared confessions they had kept for months. Thomas spoke of Eleanor, not with the excruciating grief of the early days after her death, but with the quiet gratitude of one he had loved deeply and had fond memories of. Catherine told about James, about the dreams they had shared, and that poverty had gradually eroded until only the struggle for daily survival remained. Both recognized that what they were building together was different from the loves of their youth. It was quieter, perhaps, but also more solid. It had been born of necessity, grown through mutual respect, and strengthened by shared dedication to the children who now called Catherine their mother without reservation. When they finally got up to go to sleep, Thomas reached out to Catherine for the first time since their marriage. It was not a gesture of passion, but of true companionship. She accepted his hand, and together they climbed the wooden stairs that creaked softly beneath her feet, knowing that they had found something rare and precious, a second chance to build a family based not only on romantic love, but on the deliberate choice to care for each other through all the storms that life might bring. Winter was coming to an end, but the warmth they had created inside that house would remain through all the seasons to come. Spring brought with it not only the melting of the snows, but also the renewal of hopes that had remained dormant during the cold months. Catherine discovered that she was expecting a child, news that came as an unexpected blessing to a family that had learned to find joy in the little things in life. Thomas greeted the news with a quiet emotion that manifested itself in even more attentive gestures of care. He insisted on taking on the heavier tasks Catherine used to do, arranged extra pillows for her to rest comfortably, and watched her with a tenderness he no longer tried to hide. Samuel and Mary reacted to the prospect of having a brother or sister with the natural enthusiasm of childhood, but also with the maturity of those who had learned that family was something that was built through love and dedication, not just through blood ties. They competed to help Catherine with her chores. turning each day into an anticipated celebration of the new life that was growing. During the months that followed, the farm prospered like never before. The spring rains were plentiful, cattle multiplied, and Thomas was able to expand his land by buying the neighboring property from a rancher who had decided to try his luck in California. What had begun as a union of convenience was proving to be blessed in every way. Catherine established a small garden near the house where she grew vegetables and medicinal herbs that she had learned to use from her own mother decades ago. Samuel helped her prepare the land, while Mary took charge of watering the smaller plants, creating a family project that symbolized the growth and hope they had found together. Sunday afternoons became special moments when the family gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the western sky with colors that changed every day. Catherine, her belly already rounded, settled into the rocking chair Thomas had built especially for her, while the children played in the yard and he finished the last chores of the day. It was during one of these quiet moments that Catherine realized how completely her life had changed since that day when she had arrived walking down the dusty road, carrying only a bundle and the determination to survive. Now she not only survived, but flourished, surrounded by people who loved her and whom she loved in return. The baby was born during a golden September morning, brought into the world by the expert hands of Martha Henderson, and welcomed by a family who were waiting for him as the final confirmation that they had created something truly special together. He was a boy who was named James Thomas McKenna, honoring both Catherine's first husband and the man who had become her true life partner. Samuel held his newborn brother with the seriousness of someone who understood the importance of the moment, while Mary softly hummed a lullaby that Catherine had taught her. Thomas stood by his bedside, watching his wife and son with an expression of complete accomplishment. That night, when the house finally settled down and the baby slept peacefully in the crib Thomas had carved during the last few months, Catherine and Thomas sat down once more on the porch. The stars shone in the vast Colorado sky, the same stars that had witnessed so many stories of struggle and survival in those rugged lands. Catherine held the small sculpture Thomas had made for her, now joined by others he had continued to create. The entire McKenna family immortalized in wood, each figure representing not just people, but moments of love, care, and shared growth. They had proven that sometimes the best love stories don't start with overwhelming passion, but with two people brave enough to build something beautiful on the solid foundations of mutual need, respect, and dedication. What had begun as a practical arrangement had grown into the foundation of a true home, where children would grow up knowing that family is something they choose to create every day through small acts of kindness and great demonstrations of faith in one another. The westerly wind blew gently across the fields, carrying with it the promises of all the springs to come. If this story touched your heart, you will love to know other narratives of the Wild West that we bring here on the channel. Sign up now so you don't miss any adventures and activate the bell to be notified whenever a new story is published. Your journey through the wilds and brave hearts of the American West is just beginning.